Ladies and gentlemen, do you want to build the absolute best gaming PC you possibly can for about £1,000 or dollars? If the answer is yes, you're in the right place, because today we're going to build an epic gaming PC. This is probably my favorite type of gaming PC to build because it's all about price to performance at that magic price point, and there's quite a lot of things we can do as well to make this thing even better, even cheaper, and we're going to walk you through absolutely everything you need to know, including all of the parts, how to actually put it together, and then of course those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you can see what you're actually going to get for your money. It is going to be genuinely really exciting, and I can't wait to show you everything that we've got and how to put it together. But first, we need to say a massive thank you to this video's sponsor. It's time to go big with Corsair's mighty new enclosure, the Frame 5000D. This awesome case can fit just about anything, with support for up to a whopping 420mm radiator, 10 140mm fans, or multiple 360mm coolers. The new front panel features a 3D mesh for up to 12% better airflow than the previous version. You get 5 USB ports on the front, and it is massively modular, letting you upgrade, swap, and mod all to your heart's content. Learn more about this incredible case today with the link down below. Now, as you perhaps expect in 2025, actually $1,000 isn't necessarily the easiest price point to hit because we have quite a lot of price inflation. There's a lot of products that are absolutely not worth buying, and it's just a bit of a sea of weirdness in the PC gaming space. But I've spent a fair amount of time actually planning this out, and I'm really happy with what we have. And we're going to go through absolutely everything, as I say, starting with the motherboard, because this is not necessarily the first component you need to pick, but obviously this is key because everything else is going to sit upon this, and if you spend too much on your motherboard, you can forget that £1,000 budget before you've even got started. Now, the one we have here is the best that I have in my selection. This is the B850 Live Mixer from ASRock, but if you can go back and get previous generation B650 motherboard that's on sale, they're a bit hit and miss. There's not many left now, but if you can find one for around about the $100, $125 price point, that will save you a fair bit of money, because this one was about $170, $180 at the time of filming. But current pricing on literally everything is located down below if you want to recreate this yourself. But this is B850, and it's going to go with either a 7000 or 9000 series AMD Ryzen chip. Normally, and especially if you're in the UK, I would recommend a Ryzen 7600 without a shadow of a doubt. It's the cheapest one usually, it's 6 cores, it's still fantastic for gaming, and it's almost certainly not going to cause you any real bottlenecking issues in most of the scenarios you're going to use with your gaming PC, so why spend more on a gaming CPU if you're not going to access the extra FPS, and obviously it will take extra money away from the rest of your rig. However, having said that, because we're doing this on the $1,000 price point, this is the 7600X, because at the time of filming, that was a little bit cheaper. But if you buy the X version, it doesn't come with a cooler, whereas if you go for the non-X, then it uses a bit less power and actually comes with one in the box, so you can save yourself a little bit of money. So these are those two components that we're using, and then we're going to pair it obviously with the rest of the stuff that we'll walk you through as we go through, essentially. And I do always appreciate that if you're new to PC gaming, obviously it's a lot of technical terms. I mean, what's the difference between a B650 and a B850? What even is a motherboard? There's quite a lot of stuff, obviously, that we will be going through, but if you do want a complete beginner's build, where I actually go through with a beginner how to put everything together, and he's asking probably all the questions that you have in your head right now, you can also find that video in the top right corner of your screen that will explain everything as beginner friendly as possible. But assuming you have a little bit of knowledge, obviously this video will help you to pick all of the right parts and get you a rig that you're really happy with. The main difference between B850 and B650, for most people, this is always the noisy bit. For most people, actually, it's just going to be the fact that you're not going to have to flash the BIOS, to be honest, if you use a 9000 series CPU. But as we're going for 7000, that doesn't matter anyway. Otherwise, we get Wi-Fi 7 support on this motherboard, and a lot of them will come with USB 4. I mean, this one actually is pretty fully loaded with the amount of USB ports, which is really useful if you have a lot of devices. You find cheaper motherboards kind of skimp on this. We've also got good heat sinks on our SSD, supports PCI Generation 5. So there's definitely reasons to go for newer motherboards or more expensive ones. But when our key performance indicator on this, that sounds so nerdy, is essentially the FPS that we're going to get in game, obviously that is the most important thing, so please don't overspend on your motherboard. And I've got to say that I hadn't actually taken this out of the box yet, so I hadn't fully expected this. This is more of a grey rather than the white that it's kind of represented on the box, which is great if you're going for an all black build, which we can absolutely do. But I was thinking it was going to be fine to incorporate some white elements on this RAM, but clearly that's not going to happen. Just obviously buy this in black, or go for the alternative that we have here, which is some non-RGB Vengeance DDR5 Expo from Corsair. But obviously, with all of these components, you don't have to buy the specific ones. Just make sure that you can get ones that are similar, that are potentially priced a little bit less. And if you do that with every part, you might find that you can save like $10, $15 here and there. And obviously that will add up close to 100 potentially, especially if you're watching this a little bit later when hopefully pricing in the US kind of stabilizes a little bit. But yes, didn't want you thinking we were swapping that RAM out for no reason. So let's move on to our 6-core chip. Now, I'm very much intrigued to know how this is going to fare in the new Battlefield 6, because I actually tested this last week at their kind of launch event, and I was playing on an Ultra 9 with a 5080, and it was very intensive on the CPU. Granted, I was streaming at the same time, but it was using a lot of CPU horsepower. So whether this 6-core chip is finally going to meet its match in something like Battlefield, we'll obviously have to wait and see. But generally speaking, this is an awesome gaming CPU, and the 6 cores are pretty much the perfect companion for gaming. Obviously, if you stepped up to 8 cores in a fair few games, you get better performance. But if you're spending an extra £100 or $100 to get there, in the grand schemes of the budget, it's just not going to fit. But now that our CPU is where it needs to be, we can actually press on to our memory. And I mean, RGB memory definitely does look better, in my opinion. But when you're using an air cooler like we are using here today, it doesn't always quite fit. I think it would be fine actually with the Hyper 212. But as soon as you start to buy like large coolers, then you'll find it's going to cover some of the memory, and then it just looks a little bit weird because you kind of got like a random light coming in, but you can't quite see it. So actually something low profile like this is probably a better bet for air-cooled systems anyway. And obviously it does come with the benefit of usually being a fair bit cheaper because it's not got the extra components on the top. But it's very straightforward to install your memory. Just line this up so that the notch actually lines up with the notch there. Then just push it into slots 2 and 4. Don't put them next to each other. This will give you half the speed essentially, which is bad, but do make sure that they are pushed in all the way until they properly click. But with that RAM installed, we can then press on and move on to our SSD. I'm laughing because I know Editor Carl's going to get annoyed by me throwing stuff on the floor, but I clear it up. It just upsets him.
Maybe I shouldn't upset my editor. Maybe I should
give him a free 5090. Or maybe we should just continue throwing stuff on the floor. A lot cheaper that way. And we can press on to our storage. So this is an SSD. If you've been doing PC gaming for years, you'll probably remember you'd have a hard drive. Then you moved on to those like SATA SSDs. Now these tiny little things, they just plop in your motherboard, really easy, straightforward. Generally speaking, you want to use this top slot. This one has like a quick release look. Yeah, literally just push that in, and then the whole thing kind of just secures off. It's got a latch there. Whilst we're here, we can also remove this little film look, because that will stop the thermal pad from making contact with your SSD, which would be bad. Make sure you do the same as well with this other one. This is one of the signs of a more expensive motherboard actually, when you have a double-sided heatsink, which for any SSD really over 2 terabytes, it makes quite a big difference. But it should just be a case of moving this little latch out of the way, then lining this up, pushing it in, and then that will secure that in place. Then you pick up the cover and just whack that back on as you found it. We've reached that point though where we can move on to the final motherboard component, and this is our CPU cooler. Obviously, if you want to go really fancy and get an all-in-one, then you might potentially change the mounting here, but obviously you do that a little bit later. But if you're going for an air cooler, make sure that you do this now before you put it in the case, as it's just way easier. Now, my personal favorite is the Arctic Freezer 36, the ARGB version, but in the States at the moment, that's getting on for $50, where you can get this for around about 28. Bear in mind that this is not going to use a massive amount of power. I would say this makes more logical sense, but it's not the absolute best one out there, but it looks good, and as I say, it's affordable, and it's way better than the stock cooler that you get with the 7600 non-X. So this is probably the way I would go for this budget. You just want to take the top fan off, then you want to pick up the AMD mounting brackets and gently lay these over the top so that they actually line up with these holes. Then get the little screws and just gently screw from the underside so that that's attached to the cooler. Do the same with the other side. Then you can get your motherboard and then remove the default AM5 mount. Seems scary, but it's just 4 screws and a bit of plastic. It should lift off just like that. Grab the thermal compound that does come in the box. You need to do this, do not forget, or you will probably cook your CPU if your motherboard doesn't work out what's going on. Small pea-sized amount in the middle. Then you can pick up the 2-on-2 halo, line that up with the screws, and then this is the bit that you do need to do relatively gently. Screw one bit in, go diagonally, screw a little bit, and then repeat until all 4 screws are in. And then you can tighten up, because if you just over tighten one, you will not get the other one in, I can almost guarantee it. And then once you've done that, the final piece of the puzzle, that fan should literally just hook on with those little hanger hooks, just like that, look. And then you have these 2 cables. One is for your RGB, and then the other one is actually for the fan to do some spinning. The fan plugs into this little grey one here, and this is the same on most motherboards, whereas this RGB just connects to either of these two little connections here on the right. Literally just like that. And with that then, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to say that we are pretty much good to go. We can get this inside our case. And if you're following along at home and you really do want to nail down that $1,000 budget, as much as it pains me to say it, you do need to look for something a little bit cheaper than this. But this is the Lancool 207. This is a really nice case actually because it's very small, yet still can actually accommodate a lot of stuff. And it does come with fans as standard as well, so you're not going to have to fork out extra for fancy stuff that you really don't need. Now, having said that, this particular one is actually the digital version, which I didn't realize when I was pricing this up, so take the pricing into account with the standard one. This comes with solid fans, but then you do get this like LCD on the front that can give you temperatures and things, so you can actually kind of have something cool on your PC, or obviously see how your cooling is whilst you're gaming, which is quite useful. But if you wanted to save money, go for a case that's around about like $50, $60 or so, and that will save you what, 30, 40, maybe even 50 if you went for this one, which obviously can make a fair bit of difference. But do be aware that as you drop down in terms of quality, the quality of the case does start to drop down considerably as well. Whereas this, as I say, is very well built for the money, which is great. I haven't actually seen inside this bit yet. Yeah, look, you've got some cable management here as well, so you can get everything neat. Power supply, that's a little bit different, isn't it? The power supply actually goes here at the front, rather than traditionally you kind of squeeze it in here, because I have used the original 207, but not this digital one, I think. But let's cut this cable tie, shall we? And I have taken out all of the screws and things that we need from the bottom chamber, and then it's just a case of screwing your motherboard into position. So you're going to want to lay this down nice and flat. This is why I say always build in like an area with a lot of light, so you can actually see what you're doing. And if you imagine that this is by no means difficult, but if you're going to install the CPU cooler, especially if you have a larger one, it does get a lot more difficult if you do this inside the chassis. But otherwise, you're just trying to line this up so that this central hole here kind of catches the motherboard and everything else kind of pings into position. And then it is just a case of finding these screw holes and actually getting it a screw down and fixing this down. And actually, whilst we're here, we can also remove the PCIe slot covers from 2 and 3, as this is where the graphics card is going to sit. Now, at this stage, we will turn it around though and grab these cables. And I won't say that this is complicated, because it's not, but obviously you do need to work out what everything is. And if you've not done this before, just check your motherboard manual to see where everything is and see exactly what the ports are. But you'll probably have one of these, which is a USB Type-C, which actually makes the C port work on the top. Annoyingly, this is not actually a USB-C plug though. This is kind of unique to motherboards, which is a bit annoying, and it's not reversible. Then we do actually have this, which is a front panel connection. This is what actually makes the power button do something. And then elsewhere, we have a USB 3, we have a USB 2, which I believe on this case is actually for that LCD. We have a fan cable, because the daisy-chained fans are connected to this. And then somewhere we should have our HD audio, and this is what gets an analog headset or a pair of headphones or something to work if you plug in the 3.5mm jack in the front. But let's be honest, most of us probably aren't going to use this anymore. But what I'm going to do is just pull these through to their respective positions. So our USB-C is this little silver one here. You'll find if it doesn't go in like this, try turning it round and then it should just slide in. The USB 3 is this one directly above it. On this board we actually have two, so pick your poison and just gently insert that in. Then we can plug in the all-important front panel down here at the bottom right. Then we've got our USB 2 for the LCD on the front of this. Two fan cables down here at the bottom middle. That HD audio all the way at the bottom left. Oh, but ladies and gentlemen, now comes the moment that you guys have almost certainly been waiting for. And I know for a fact there's going to be plenty of people watching this going, oh, I wish you'd got a green box. I really want an NVIDIA GPU inside here. Which I understand, because most people do go for NVIDIA, but again, for our budget, this seems to be the best bet. So this is the 9060 XT 16 gig. You can buy an 8GB version of this, and to be fair, it is a lot less. But if you're building a gaming PC and you want it to be future-proof, I would highly recommend that you do go for this 16 gig version. Now, when planning this, I was kind of umming and ahhing between this and a 4060 Ti. I'm a year out. A 5060 Ti, 16 gig, but that is actually a fair bit more expensive, and again, will obviously push the budget further out. But if you wanted to do that, it will have slightly higher performance in some games, so that's recommended if you want to upgrade it. But for most people, this is probably going to be the way to go. You don't necessarily have to buy this one, which is the Power Color Reaper, but this is a RRP model, so I would just go for whatever one is cheaper, essentially. Oh, and once again, loads of noise, but then you're presented with this tiny little thing. Look, it's very cute. I actually quite like the Reaper models because they're cheap and cheerful. I mean, it's still quite an expensive product, but in terms of what it could be, it's relatively cheaper than some of the other models, but I still think it looks good. You have one single 8-pin on this, and in terms of noise levels, we'll show you this at the end of the video, but shouldn't be anything crazy. It really is just a case of lining this up with this little PCIe slot here, then just give it a good push till it clicks into place. Then grab your screwdriver and secure this down. But let's press on to the bit that really matters now, the final bit. Your PC won't work without this, the power supply. And I know it's a bit boring that I always use this. I am very boring with my boring PC part selection, but this one is from MSI. It's the A650BN, 650 watts. You need 500 watts for this particular GPU. Easiest way to do it actually is just to have a look at your GPU box, or obviously online it will tell you what the recommended power supply requirement is, but do be aware that they're kind of usually over-speccing it slightly, so you could be like 50 watts under and you'll probably be fine, but obviously it depends on the exact rig that you're going for, so I'd always recommend meeting the minimum requirement of the GPU. But the downside to going for a cheaper power supply like this is essentially that you get all of the cables like pre-attached, which is annoying. You're going to have somewhere to put them, but usually with a power supply like this, there's not that many cables anyway, because obviously it's limited by the wattage of the unit, so it shouldn't be a problem and can save yourself some money. But please don't go for the absolute most bargain basement power supply or PSU that you can, because you want it to work safely. And this case does do things a little bit differently, because in order to get the power supply in, you do actually need to take this kind of side piece off. You won't need to do this with most cases, I assure you. Then you can just gently move this round, get your power supply fan facing downwards. You need to get this in here. And this is one of the design flaws that I find with this case. It's just, you've almost certainly got a lot of bulk here. So this isn't actually the easiest thing to do, but obviously once it's done, it's done. There we go. Then you can spin that back round. Oh, there's a screwdriver, okay. So ideally don't do that, but do grab this little cable here, make sure that it's inserted nice and snugly, and then that this little on-off switch is set to the on position, or obviously your PC won't work and you'll get sad. Then screw that into place. Then you can replace that cover. And then all of these cables, again, look quite intimidating, but actually they're very straightforward. Just feed this large one through the top. Grab the one that says CPU and feed this through the top right. The ones that say PCIe can tuck in through the bottom. And then the rest of these, we don't actually need. So we can kind of form them into a neat ball and just park those over here. Obviously tie them down once the system works. ATX is this large one here, look. It's worth noting that if these aren't plugged in all of the way, the whole system also might not work, and if you're missing any, the system definitely won't work. So take your time and make sure that they are all secure. And then last, but certainly not least, we can get this 8-pin and just tuck that into the graphics card until it clicks. Obviously being sure to neaten it up a little bit if you can. But otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, that is it. That is your gaming PC, hopefully complete and ready to go. Really, really straightforward here. Nothing particularly complex. We didn't have to muck around with adding extra fans or radiators and things. It is just plug and play, really. Really, really straightforward. And actually, I like the look of this a lot. I mean, I know it's quite minimal. Obviously, the case does a lot of the talking as well. But if you can spend a little bit more, then you are going to get a more premium chassis. But absolutely, if you wanted to bring this way closer to exactly $1,000 rather than 1,080 or 1,085 or whatever it was, the case is a good way of doing that. But should we see if it works? Moment of truth time then, folks. Is this going to be the one? Are we going to have any issues, or are we going to be all okay? Obviously, we do also need to promote the PC-Centric mouse mat. The last units are still available. You can get them in the clearance sale in the description down below, or in the pinned comment, or whatever it is, or at pccentric.store. Highly recommend you get one before it sells out. And as I say, apologies that the shipping cost is a little bit on the expensive side. Nothing I can do about that. But here we are. Is it going to work? Yes! Not loads of RGB, but we knew that going into it. And I will say that the only feedback I'd say is I know obviously we needed to do it to fit in the budget, but if you could spend just a little bit more and get the Arctic Freezer 36 with a larger heatsink and 2 fans, I think that would just fit this case better and look a fair bit better. But as I say, we're trying to stick to the budget here as much as possible. So this is what we needed to do. But is this actually going to boot? Because otherwise it's a great looking system, isn't it? It's thinking about it. It's thinking about it. I see ASRock. Yes. Doesn't get old. Booting a new rig doesn't get old. People always say,
oh, he's just putting that on.
No, It really doesn't. I've already got a copy of Windows on this, so you will obviously need to install your own. It's really straightforward. I've made a full video about this, but otherwise you just need to go into the BIOS, enable the XMP or Expo profile of your RAM, restart, and then hopefully it should work. And also, if you can, just set your PC to be silent in terms of the fan profile in the BIOS, and this will give you the best trade-off between performance and noise levels. But with that, all that's left to say is let's get some games on this and see how it runs. Oh, and ladies and gentlemen, I've got to admit, I was so confident that everything was going to work out perfectly, but for some reason, the irony's not lost on me, that Corsair RAM, even with a BIOS update, didn't want to take the Expo profile, which means we couldn't overclock it to the full 6000 megahertz, which makes no sense. So what I did was go back and put the original Team Group RAM inside it, which is white, which I thought would look horrible, but actually you can't even notice, and sure enough, straight away, Expo profile, boom, system works without issues, which is a little bit strange, but we can do a little bit of peel for you. There it is, peel complete, except there's another one on the inside. No one saw this, let's pretend I did this right first time. And I've really got to say that overall, I am really happy with how this thing turned out. I mean, okay, it's not perfect, we've definitely done even more attractive rigs on this channel, but I do think that for the price point, I'm incredibly happy with it, really. I don't think that this is a bad looking system, I'd say it's quite good overall. And obviously all of the improvements that you can make, you can just do this steadily over the next year or so. You don't have to throw all your money at your gaming PC immediately. And if you didn't have access to it, what we're doing with this is obviously just making sure that you can get the performance today and then maybe like some extra fans or maybe a slightly bigger cooler at a later date. But these things obviously don't make masses of difference. The other thing I'll draw your attention to is actually the display on this that actually, I gotta say, is way better than I expected. I mean, in terms of resolution, I think it's like 540p, but on a screen this size, from distance you see it away from it, it looks pin sharp, and you can get loads of information on this, and you can even use this as a secondary display if you want in Windows. I was having a little experiment with this, so if you, I don't know, you wanted like a live stock tracker or something on this, anything really, you can just drag it there, leave it, fantastic. But most people, the software L-Connect 3 actually works quite well. But having said this, as I say, if you do want to save money on this system, I would highly advise that you go for a cheaper case, maybe around about like £50 or dollars or so, and then that will pretty much get this as close to the £1,000 or $1,000 budget, I should say, that you can get. But likewise, if you just want to save a little bit of money, you're not fussed about the screen, obviously you can buy the non-digital version that comes with RGB fans, which might be more suitable for some people. But yes, very happy with it. I just think if you can get the Arctic Freezer 36, it will feel this rig a little bit better and just make it look a little bit more finished. But other than that, very happy with it. Should we jump into some games? And actually, up first, we have a PlayStation exclusive. Somehow, it made its way to PC. Because if you didn't know, most PlayStation games actually are migrated now across to PC after like a couple of years or so, which, okay, it's annoying you don't get it day one, but it's great that we get it at all, to be honest. And as you can see, this is The Last of Us Part 2. No spoilers here, this is right at the start of the game, really. But this is in a little bit more of a CPU demanding section. And this is always quite good to test, but obviously the system needs to be balanced. It needs to be not bottlenecked by the CPU as much as possible. And here it looks as if we're doing quite well. We're getting around about 99% of GPU utilization, which would imply that we're not getting bottlenecking in this scene. That, as I say, is quite intense. I think if you go a little bit later when you get to Seattle, the load goes up a little bit more as well. But this is a good indicator really of what you can expect from the game. And the other thing as well, which is pretty nuts, is the fact that despite the fact that, you know, this is still an expensive product, but in terms of graphics cards, this is not an RTX 5090. What we're running here actually is 4K at the high preset. I've turned the textures all the way up with FSR 4, which is the new technology, and you can see it works so well. And I honestly thought we might get like 35, 40 FPS or something like that. But no, we're getting 87 frames a second at these settings on this 4K monitor, and it looks absolutely ridiculous. We're not using any frame generation. You can use the AMD frame gen if you want to go down that route. But honestly, this is a really good experience. I mean, let's try a different section of the game. And actually, very quickly, whilst we're in this screen, you can see we're currently compiling some shaders. And this is one of the areas, if you have like a higher core count CPU, it's going to complete faster. But bear in mind, you only need to do this once. It's not the end of the world. But yes, that's one of the weaknesses, if you like, of a 6-core chip. That's also why you saw that CPU temp skyrocket to the high 80s. But during a gaming load, look, you can see we're getting around about 62 degrees, but we'll keep an eye on this throughout the game. But you can see now that the CPU load has gone down, it's not actually changed the frame rate. We're still looking at around about 80 to 85 frames a second or so. So yes, very happy actually with the way that this plays. And I am going to change this to 1440p, not because we need it, because we need extra FPS, but because most people probably aren't going to be playing on a 4K display with this GPU. We'll change our upscaling to balanced. and then we will come back into the game and see what that does. Obviously the image doesn't look quite so good now, but honestly still looks pretty tasty to me, and you can see that that frame rate has actually gone up considerably now to around about 125, 130 FPS. And this is what PC gaming is all about, right? As I say, this is by no means a cheap product, but in terms of GPUs, it's nothing crazy, and yet as long as you're willing to use upscaling and FSR4 or DLSS or whatever it is that you're going to use depending on the card that you get, it is very, very impressive, and it lets you have experiences like this. Don't let anyone tell you that DLSS is a joke or FSR is rubbish, you should never use it. The point is you have these tools available at your arsenal, and if you can use FSR4, as I say, it's so much better than the previous versions. I think you're going to be very, very impressed. And if you don't, you can turn it off and have your 40 FPS or whatever it might be. I mean, let's see what it is at 1440. It's probably not that bad. I mean, coming out of it, actually, we're getting around about 75 to 80 FPS. So similar to what we were getting actually at 4K with that FSR turned to performance. I wasn't recording any of that, was I? Bollocks. Fortunately for me though, I have good memory, so I was able to go back and no one would have noticed I haven't just told you. But this is also a good opportunity just to show you why it's really important to buy a 16GB of VRAM card rather than 8, because we've gone back whilst I'm obviously getting that footage again, and I've noticed that at 4K, so the FSR is still at performance but same settings, you can see we're using 13GB of VRAM, and it's enabling us to have this super smooth experience. As I say, I'm really impressed, and I think it's well and truly punching for a $1,000 gaming PC. But yes, 13GB of VRAM, whereas if you went for the exact same rig but you went for the 8GB version of this card, you'd save yourself £100 in dollars, but you would not be able to play at these settings. You just wouldn't, and that's a game today. Fast forward to 2 years, 3, 4, and a lot of the games that are going to be coming out, you are severely going to be compromised, and I think you will be just kicking yourself that you didn't spend that little bit extra to get the 16. Right, but ladies and gentlemen, from one single player game to another, let's press on to Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Once again, it's the game I'm actively playing. I've actually really got into it. I'm so glad. I love PC gaming. I don't always have masses of time, but this is the game that has made me find the time, which is fantastic and just what I want. Now, we're running this at very similar settings to what we had for The Last of Us. So we've got this running at native 4K, but obviously we're using upscaling to get here. So we've got FSR set to performance. I'm not sure though if this is FSR 4. I'm gonna say no. Because if you have a look at those wires, like at the top right, you can see that they are breaking up a little bit, and I don't think you would get that in FSR 4. But let's check this. No, didn't think so. Now, I'm not saying that obviously if you had FSR, this would clear up all of the issues with this game, and I'm not saying that there are loads of issues. Ultimately, this just is one of the issues that you are going to have to contend with, and I'm not saying that this is going to be like massively noticeable to everyone, but it's certainly a fair bit more noticeable than you would get with better versions of DLSS or obviously the full-fat FSR 4. And I guess this is one of the problems with buying into a new technology. Whilst there are a decent amount of supported games, it's just nowhere near as complete as NVIDIA's DLSS technology that was better from a long time ago, if that kind of makes sense. The new transformer model for DLSS is better than FSR 4, but honestly, they trade blows, which is really, really quite cool. But anyway, as you can see, once again though, we are still getting a very, very smooth frame rate, around about 90 to 95 FPS. This is also a title that does pack ray tracing as standard, which is pretty cool, and the latest generation of AMD cards, as you can see, does actually work very well with ray tracing. Once again, it's not still quite as good as NVIDIA GPUs, but it's not enough of a problem to be a problem anymore, which is good. And obviously you can benefit from the fact that this card is cheaper while still giving you a significant amount of performance. I mean, once again, did you really expect to be getting around about 90 to 100 FPS in Indiana Jones at 4K? I didn't think so, but I can hear you already. Obviously you do want to see how this performs at different settings. So let's start by finding the FSR and then turning this to balanced and see if this can clear up some of those issues. And yes, actually that looks considerably better. We are still getting a little bit of breakup on some of those wires, but it's no longer noticeable when you're not looking at it, whereas before, like, you were drawn, if you like, to the errors. So this is definitely a better way to play. Frame rate has dropped to around about 80 frames a second or so, but as you can clearly see, this is still way more frame rate really than you need in a game like Indiana Jones. I've been playing it at about 100 FPS, but granted that was on a 5090 with path tracing, and I don't really think that's necessary. Let's go all the way up to quality though. Just want to see what this does to the frame rate. Obviously it does drop it down a little bit more. Now looking about 70 to 75 FPS. Still, again, getting a little bit of kind of moire breakup on some of the wires, but obviously it's even sharper now. So to be honest, this is probably the way I would choose to play. But what about 1440? And in the exact same scene, the exact same settings with FSR still at quality, the frame rate's jumped to around about 120, 115 FPS. So for most people, this is probably going to be how you choose to play. But again, if you want to see native, we can go down. I should say, by the way, that the textures are at very ultra for texture. Everything else is set to high. Then we can turn upscaling off, come out of it, and then you can see we're getting around about 90, 91 FPS or so. So still, obviously, you will get some breakup on the wires, though. This is just the nature of not having enough pixels to have everything like as super sharp as it would be at, say, like 4K, 5K, 8K. But yes, if you wanted to run this without any FSR at all, this is the frame rate you can expect. But I think that's enough talk about all this horrible single player. How about we move on to the bit that really matters, of course, being the multiplayer. And once again, we are going to start with 4K, not suggesting you should be playing all of your multiplayer games at 4K resolution, but hey, depends on the monitor, depends on your preferences. And this is running at the high preset, and you can see on this particular map, in this particular instance, we're getting around about 115 to 115 FPS. And to be fair, one of the things I'd say about Apex is if you actually use like the driver software or potentially some third party like lossless scaling or something, then you can actually kind of not use DLSS or FSR, but use an upscaling technique to essentially render at a lower resolution and upscale it. So this is what I'd recommend doing if you do want to play at 4K, because even if you set it to like 80, 90% of the resolution, you're probably not going to notice a difference, but obviously you will get a higher frame rate. I'm not saying 110, 120 FPS is anything to be sniffed at, but obviously you want the highest FPS you can get. As of course you'd expect though, turning down the resolution to 1440 does yield a significantly higher frame rate. Annoyingly, the text is next to some other text that's now appeared in the game, but you can see we're now getting close to 200 frames a second just by setting it to 1440. Exact same settings, again, no upscaling or anything. Obviously, Apex Legends not the single most intense multiplayer game that you can get, but this is no bad thing. It's still an absolutely fantastic looking title, and obviously the higher the frame rate, assuming you have a monitor to back it up that can do the refresh rate, obviously the better experience that you are going to get. But let's face it, everyone, Apex Legends is old news. How about we play the latest cutting-edge title ever? This being some Fortnite. And look, I've got a Superman cloak. I mean, what is more fun than this? I joke. This is actually the game that I play and love all of the time, though that will probably be replaced by Battlefield 6 if that comes out and is actually good. Anyway, that aside, we're running this at 4K. All of the settings are at high once again. Textures I've turned up to very high along with the view distance, and we are using XESS now because FSR is not in this title to actually, well, be our upscaling technique essentially, and that's set to performance. So if you did once again want to play this on like a 4K TV or 4K screen, then this is probably going to be the best way to do it if you're most concerned about image quality and still getting your smoothness. I certainly wouldn't recommend playing at 4K without any upscaling, and there's no point in a multiplayer title trying to go more for fidelity really rather than fluidity. But I imagine as soon as we turn this down to 1440, our frame rate should increase. And sure enough, as if by magic, it has. We're now looking around about 170 to 180 FPS or so. I did turn the XESS up to balance though, but clearly there's a little bit more you could do to sort of get the right balance, I suppose, between fluidity and frame rate. Kind of depends actually on the refresh rate of your monitor. This is a 240 FPS display, so I would probably keep this at balanced, maybe turn it up just a notch just to make it look ever so slightly better. But obviously if you're running on like 120 FPS display, then obviously you have frames that you're kind of wasting, if you like, because they won't be displayed to your monitor anyway. So I'm gonna get attacked, but very quickly we'll turn this all the way up to ultra quality, just see what difference that makes. And yeah, sure enough, that does drop it down to around about 150 or so. And because you have that variability, if you are playing at 120 FPS, this is still probably going to be a good sweet spot to stop your 1% lows kind of dropping down too much. But yes, the game definitely does look better. It's nice and sharp actually, despite the fact that we're obviously not running this at the native 4K resolution of this display. Fortnite scales very nicely actually. So yes, this is definitely a title that plays quite well with the upscaling techniques. Other than that, I think the only things really we need to talk about are thermals and acoustics, and you can see that our CPU is running about 76 degrees. As I say, if you can get that Freezer 36 for the same sort of money or maybe $10 more, definitely worth doing that. But for whatever reason at the time of filming, the price has actually gone up a fair bit in the States, which is annoying, but in the UK it's probably worth going for. And then in terms of thermals on the GPU, as you'd expect, around about 68 degrees or so, so nothing problematic there whatsoever. The hotspot's looking around about 89, but that's normal. It's just on NVIDIA cards, they don't actually often give you this information, so we can't show it in the videos. But yes, overall been very, very impressed. And then last but not least, bear in mind that this is running flat out. very, very quiet. So overall, I'm incredibly happy with this system. There are some easy changes that you can make to make this a little bit more affordable, or of course, if you have a bit more to spend, then of course you can make this even better. The main way really would just be to go for an RTX 5060 Ti 16 gig, and this should give you a higher frame rate and access to DLSS, transformer, which is obviously the best form of upscaling, and then just generally speaking, better upscaling in more titles because DLSS is better and it's kind of gone back for a much longer period of time essentially. But if you did want to make it cheaper, main thing really, just drop down the case a little bit to something a bit more affordable. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you make of our system? Do you think this is the dream $1,000 PC, or are you going to say, no, actually, I think you find you've done that completely wrong, I would put that in there? Or hopefully you're just watching this in a few months' time and the prices have come down, so you think, well, this is way under the $1,000 budget, you could have gone bigger. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed this, get yourself subscribed, and of course, as always, if you do want to check out current pricing on anything that was featured in this build, you can find it listed down below with our affiliate links.
And while you're down there, why not start planning your new build with a Corsair Frame 5000D? This mighty case is all about modularity and ease of building, with Corsair's InfiniRail fan mounting system, Rapid Route 2.0 cable management system, and a pre-installed GPU anti-sag bracket. It comes with 4 140mm fans as standard, supports reverse connect motherboards, and is available in both black or white, RGB or solid. Get yours today with a link down below.
But thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.